Hey there, welcome to the show. Today, I've got a special presentation for you that's focused on problem areas for a lot of you out there, and that's what do you plant in the shade? I get these questions all the time. And by the way, I want to just thank everyone for joining us, subscribing, listening to us on our podcast, going to the vlog, checking us out on YouTube. It's really great to hear where you're from. It's kind of fun to see which states are kind of in the lead. Right now, we got California and Texas pulling out ahead. I want to hear more from my friends in Michigan and Illinois, and we got lots from Pennsylvania, but it's a lot of fun to see where you're coming from and what your questions are. So let's get started about shade. When I had the good fortune to be a graduate student in garden history and design in England, I became a member of the Royal Horticultural Society by examination. And what I learned there at the RHS was that there's so many opportunities for us in the shade. And if you focus on texture, first and foremost, texture can really create a beautifully, visually compelling garden. It doesn't mean you have to give up on color. And we're going to talk about some of my favorite ways to bring that little bit of sparkle into some of those shady and troublesome areas, okay? And I'm also going to answer a few questions today that you all have sent in. Love getting those. They're always fun to answer. So why don't we get started with some of my favorite shade plants? Today, we're focusing strictly on perennials. I know, you love perennials. I love perennials. Who doesn't love perennials? Because they come back year after year. Probably the top two perennials for shade would have to be the Hosta. As you can see, it's very well represented here, and ferns. But there's some other players out there that I want you to know about that can add a lot of pizzazz to those shady areas. Now, first, let's define what is a shade garden, all right? So shade, partial shade, deep shade, sun, full sun, all of these things can be a little confusing. I think full sun's pretty clear. I think dense shade is pretty clear. That's where you're getting very little light. I think where we can do the best with our plants is when we have dappled light in shade, where you get a little bit of shade or you get a few hours in the early morning. That's usually plenty of light for many of these shade perennials. Now, if we start with Hosta, which is the old standby, and if you've gotten into Hostas, and believe me, I know about you people out there. There's some real Hostaholics out there who go crazy over these things. I mean, I have a friend who's got probably 190 different varieties of hostas. I mean, it's like that's all he thinks about are hostas. I love them, but I'm not that far into it. Some of my favorites are the old varieties like this one. This is old Crosa Regal. Now, Crosa Regal, what I like about it is it's got this blue-gray foliage. So let's talk just a moment about hosta foliage and hosta color. Because what you can get with hostas, you can go anywhere from the tiny miniature hostas to the great big leafed ones like Komodo Dragon or Empress Wu. Those are two of the largest that you'll ever find in a garden. Also, we need to talk a little bit about the texture. You can get hostas that have strap leaves, hostas that have tiny little mouse ear-like leaves. You can find hostas with big, round, more ovate leaves. But many of them are strap-like leaves, as you can see here with Crosa Regal. The other thing to keep in mind is the color of the leaf of hosta. You can see this is a glaucous, as we say in the trade, or blue-gray-green here. But some of them are very much in the chartreuse family. Like if you're looking for a big one and you like that chartreuse color, try Sum and Substance. That is an amazing hosta. It's the kind of hosta you would use like Komodo Dragon or Empress Wu as a focal point. But what I like about Sum and Substance is it's chartreuse. So you get this illumination in the garden. It's almost like this, it's radiating light. It's a bowl of light in the garden. So let's talk now about color and variegation in hosta, because that's how you can bring dappled light into a space. Just in your mind's eye, think about walking down a woodland path, and if all the hosta there that you're using, let's just say, for instance, you've gone crazy for hosta, like my friend, but you've gone with all greens and they're all the same color, that's not quite as interesting. It can be with texture, but it's not quite as interesting as if you mix in some of those colored hosta, some with some variegation. Now, like this one, you can see this one has a cream or ivory colored edge on it, which is really quite beautiful. And this sparkles in the shade because of the light color. So if we just take, for instance, the juxtaposition of these two hostas, they have similar leaf texture or size, right? Crosa Regal, as I just said, bluish gray color. And then this is called blue ivory. It has a similar blue cast to it, not quite as much as you see with the Crosa Regal, but it has this very definite ivory edge on it, hence the name blue ivory. So you will see that these lighter plants, these variegated hostas, will really add a lot of pizzazz in the garden. Now I want to move on from hosta into some of the other shade perennials that are so important. Probably the second most important one for me anyway are ferns. There are so many wonderful native North American ferns. And then when you start casting the net and you start looking at ferns worldwide, my gosh, there are so many to choose from. Up here, you can see one that's just emerging. This is one of my favorite Native American ferns. This one's called cinnamon fern, Osmunda cinnamonea. That's its botanical name. But don't be thrown off by these botanical names. What I love about these is they can get almost 4 feet tall. And the reason they're called cinnamon ferns is they'll put up a stalk in the center in the summer that's cinnamon colored. It looks like a cinnamon stick in a way. And that's where it gets its name, cinnamon fern. It also has a very close cousin called Osmunda regalis. And the name regalis suggests its name. It's the royal fern. And both of those are excellent Native American ferns that are very, very hardy. That's the great thing about so many of these ferns and hostas. For our friends in the north, you can grow these things like nobody's business in your garden, and you know that. What you do know is that the deer tend to love hosta, so you need to make plans to manage the salad bar in your garden and do what you can to keep the deer out. They're less prone to eat ferns, but they do love to eat hosta. So I'm just being straight up with you about that. What do you do about deer? Look, fencing obviously helps. I always kid and say, we post a lot of venison recipes around the garden. They read them. They're on social media. They tell their friends and they stay away. They get the idea they don't want to end up in the crock pot. But, deer are a problem everywhere. And, I'd love to hear some of your cures for deer. We'll share those with our friends who are listening and watching the show. Now, the other thing I want to point out here among some of these shade plants is that you can also do layers of color, layers of texture, starting with low ground covers. And I've brought a few of these shade lovers in here just to share with you today. For instance, here in front, I've got this gorgeous chartreuse creeping jenny. It's called a Lismachia, very hardy. It's a plant that you can grow between stones if you're walking down your woodland path in your garden in the shade. This is an excellent plant for growing between those stones or as a ground cover. What you will find is that the denser the shade, the greener creeping jenny goes. Typically, creeping jenny is very chartreuse, can be very, very golden the more sun it gets. And this is one of these plants that will grow in both sun and shade. I've planted it in deep shade. It goes very green. I've also planted it in full hot sun, and it goes very, very chartreuse. So just think about that. But what I love about it are these elongated runners that have the leaves symmetrically offset on the runner. And what is wonderful about this is everywhere that runner touches the ground, right here at the node where the leaves meet the stem, if that touches the ground, you will begin to see some tiny little roots, just like here. I don't know if you can see that or not, but right where the little leaves meet the stem, it's already producing a little root. And this is what makes this plant such a great addition to a shade path. So if we begin to think about this tiering up from the edge of the path, moving our way up to larger plants, this is a great plant for a ground cover. I've also brought another one in here that you may know. This one is a little variegated Ajuga, or Trumpet Bugle. It can take very cold temperatures. What I love about it, this particular variety, this is a variegated one. You can see it has a white edge on the leaf. The leaf green is a little bit of that bluish gray like we saw over here with the color of the Hosta, this Crosa Regal. Very similar blue-gray. This has a little bit of a vein of purple in it, which is very nice. Many of you may know Ajuga as there's one called Chocolate Chip that's very, very dark. There's a wide range of these Ajugas. They are perfect companion plants, good bedfellows, as we say, in the shade perennial garden. So think about some of these Ajugas. This is one that I just lifted out of the garden. It's looking a little disheveled this morning because it's been lifted out, but we'll put it back in its home. But it was important for me to show you how early it flowers. And as soon as it finishes flowers with these beautiful purple spikes, if you have time, just pinch those off. By just pinching off some of these spent blooms, what you'll do is you'll get a recurrence of flowers through the summer. It's just a beautiful plant with that variegated foliage. But again, check out some of the other Ajugas. There's some tiny leafed ones, some very dark colored ones, which are a little hard to see in the shade. Keep that in mind. If you use the really dark ones, contrast them with something light. So that contrast of light to dark foliage really helps us to see the composition and it makes it more visually compelling. All right, now I want to talk about another plant that both has a gorgeous leaf. We grow it for its leaf, and we also grow it for its foliage. And these are the Heucheras. This is a wonderful one here. This is just a tiny example of the range that you can see in these Heuchera. That's the botanical name. All right, Heucheras there are many Heucheras that are native to North America. Makes them really tough plants. They can take the cold. What's wonderful about them is that the horticultural breeders have come up with so many different variations in leaf color and even pattern. Now, this is a beautiful one called Carnival Watermelon. And as you can see, I'm going to describe this for our friends who are listening to us by podcast. The back side of this is purplish pink, where the top side of the leaf has this distinct sort of apricot bronze color to the leaf. Wow. I mean, this is really great color for the shade, don't you think? Now, if you look at some of the other varieties, they can be almost metallic, very silver. Probably some of the earliest ones that came onto the market that really got us excited about Heuchera and their use in the garden were the dark burgundy leafed ones, almost the color of like a Japanese maple. There's one called Palace Purple that I've used for years. Now, it's too early in the season now for you to see these bloom, but they get their name from a tall spike that come out of this base of beautiful foliage, tall spike with lots of little tiny flowers on it. Very transparent, very ethereal looking. And this is a plant that I find really extraordinary for containers. Now, I want to talk just a moment about containers because I think we so often think, oh, heck, I've got a shade garden. What am I going to grow in the containers? There's really not much I can. Maybe I put in some impatiens, but hey, they're annuals. Last year, I did a series of shade perennial containers, okay? And we captured what those look like when I planted them, when I finished them, and then what they ended up looking like deep into the summer. But what I'm going to show you today is after a long winter, long and wet winter, with no care, what came back. And you can look here and see this container. I'm going to pull these Hosta out of the way just for a moment. But you can see here in this pot I used for my, and you know my rule of thumb on containers, in terms of plant forms, the tall, spiky, the round, full, something to cascade. The filler is here. The spiller is coming over the edge. And then we've got our thriller coming out of the top. So thriller, filler, and spiller. So here you can see this is an autumn fern. That's why the foliage looks bronze in color. Now, you can see a little damage from last year's foliage. Can you believe it wintered over? That we got some frost burn here, but it still hung on? We're in zone 8A. And so that gives you a little bit of a reference. But any of these ferns will work. I just like using this one because it had that touch of color. Here's our old friend Creeping Jenny as our spiller coming over the edge, a touch of chartreuse. Here, we've talked about this grass before. This is Ogon, O-G-O-N, Ogon, a wonderful perennial grass. It's actually a type of sedge. And what we love about this grass is that it has that gorgeous chartreuse color. So you've got this color echo going back and forth between Creeping Jenny and the Ogon grass. I've planted these in a terracotta container, just brought it in from the garden for you to see. And the color of the terracotta container, you can see, is echoed in the new fronds. That's what you call the stem of a fern, a frond. It is virtually the same color as that terracotta container. And then we would be remiss if we didn't talk about our old friend Crosa Regal. We've got that Hosta that's come back in here. And these perennials all wintered over last year with absolutely no care whatsoever. So you can see they are tough. And so I don't have to replant this container this year. It's going to come on strong. Now I'll need to go in here and clean it up a little bit and clip out some of these fronds that are showing a little bit of damage. But you can see these fiddleheads. The fiddlehead is the emerging frond. It unrolls. It looks like the end of a fiddle, hence its name. And these fiddleheads are rolling out. This reminds me of a joke a friend told me once. Anemones, Japanese anemones, also will bloom in a shade garden. They need a little bit of sun. The joke is, hey, with fronds like these, fern fronds, who needs anemones? Get it? All right, so there's my 9th grade joke for you. Okay, so now what I want to talk about are other bloomers in the shade garden because, let's face it, we all love flowers, right? So I've brought in a few here that I'm pretty excited about. What you have here is a beautiful foxglove. Now here's something deer won't eat. So if you're looking for a biennial, some of these foxgloves are more perennial than others, but this is a plant that the deer will not eat. But just look at the gorgeous colors on these. If you love foxglove like I think you love foxglove, just get into some of the varieties and colors. Oh my gosh, apricot, pure white, dark purple. These are fantastic with almost kind of an orange center and a darker outer color of sort of raspberry pink, which just make them absolutely fantastic. So think about some of these. And then here, tucked behind, is a late flowering perennial that I want you to know about that will take the shade. And it's you know, I think its foliage is really beautiful. This is a toad lily or Tricertus. There are lots of different types of Tricertus. And this particular one has a little bit of a variegation to it. It's just now emerging. So you can barely see just some of that variegation on the edge of the leaf. It's slightly chartreuse. Now what's wonderful about Tricertus or the toad lilies is that they're going to come along late in the season. Early on, you're going to have your foxglove, your Ajuga. These things are going to be blooming in the shade. Your epimediums, another plant we should talk about because they take dry shady conditions. Wonderful little ground cover, epimedium, remember that. But this Tricertus will flower with little orchid-like blooms late in the summer. This plant is undaunted by the heat. It will grow in a wide range of the country. It's another plant, if you're not growing it, you should really think about it. It's one that I recommend. I've grown it for years. Another one to think about that blooms late, about the time of the Tricertus or toad lily, is the Japanese anemone. Now, if you get these right in your garden, plant them in soil that is rich in humus, give them about half a day sun. They will bloom for you every late season in pink, white. There's a white one called Honorine Jobert, spelled Jobert, a fantastic old variety. I saw it first as a graduate student in England and did backflips over it. And it is really fantastic. So that's a good one to put like at the edge of your shade garden. Be patient with it. It will bloom for you in the late season. And again, very, very cold hardy. Okay, now let's get to the part of the show that I enjoy probably the most. Giving you a little tutorial on shade, and now we're going to answer some questions. And you guys just keep them coming. All right, we've got one from Paula Jackson, and she's saying, Alan, how do I plant elephant ears? Is it full sun, shade? Give me some help. She bought the jumbo type. Planted some years ago, but can't remember how to do them. So let me give you a little 101 on elephant ears. So when we talk about elephant ears generally, it gets a little confusing because they're divided into two groups. You've got the alocasias and you've got the colocasias, all right? So the best way I remember to identify a alocasia is that they are pointed upward. All right, so you've got the stalk that comes up, you've got this big leaf, hence the name elephant ear, and the tip of that is pointed upward. On the colocasia, what you find is the colocasia tends to have the point of the elephant ear pointing downwards, okay? All right, so that's the first distinction. The reason you want to make that distinction is because how and where you plant them plays a role here. All right, so the alocasias, those big ones with points, they can take a little bit of sun. What you want to be careful with is these really aren't considered full sun plants. I've seen them in certain parts of the country doing very well in full sun. If you live in the north, they have to be dug up because they will freeze. The bulbs are not hardy. They will freeze. But for southern gardeners, many of them can leave them in the garden and mulch them heavily at the end of the season after cutting the stalks back. We tend to dig our bulbs up and just put them in a dry, cool place. But back to the alocasia, that's the big one with the leaf pointing upward. You want to make sure that that is planted in soil that is rich in humus and drains very, very well. If you're planting colocasias, the ones where the tip points down, those can take wet feet, meaning some of them can actually be planted in standing water and do very, very well. All right. There's one that we planted called Black Magic several years ago. Dark leaf, sets up beautiful contrast, great for a water garden. I don't know if you guys are into water gardening or not, but this is one that you can, like a canna or a Louisiana iris, you can put them directly in the water and they will bloom and flourish. So think about that. If you've got a wet, soggy place that it never dries up, this is a great plant for those kinds of areas. The other thing about elephant ears that's kind of interesting is the colocasias are edible. Not so much the alocasias. There are many of those that are poisonous. So the colocasias in certain cultures, for instance, in Hawaii, I've loved having the colocasia. It's called taro. But you know, if you're not sure what you have, don't be eating your elephant ears. Just enjoy them in the garden. So Paula, for a little recap on these, remember, little shade helps. Full sun can blister the leaves. I'm not sure where you live, so if you're living in a hot part of the country, Florida, deep Texas, they're going to burn in the hot sun. The other thing to do, you ask about the bulb, how to plant it. If you look at the bulb, you will see that the point, there's a tip on the bulb, and that needs to go upward. You know, these can be rather large bulbs, many of them the size of a coconut. And then often you'll see on the bottom what's called the basal plate, some of the little root hairs from the previous season's growth. Just watch out for that. Those you want to center down in the bottom of the hole with that pointed top emerging. I've actually planted them upside down before, and they've grown back up and around. So they're pretty forgiving plants, and I love them. If you're looking for bold texture in the garden, these elephant ears, alocasias, colocaceas, either one, and banana plants are both amazing in the garden for giving you that really amazing textural contrast. All right, here's another question regarding shade. This is from Kay Green. Kay is in Colorado. Wants to grow something under her apple tree. Very dry in zone 5. Gets dappled sun all day. She's tried bee balm, hydrangea, and a shade flower seed mix with no luck. Woo, dry shade. Epimediums. Look into the epimediums. They are fantastic. It's one of the best shade perennials for dry shade, those dry conditions. The other thing you might think about is trying to establish your state flower in Colorado. I bet you know what it is. The columbine. Beautiful, beautiful varieties of columbine. There's a McKenna yellow that gets very beautiful, and it will reseed itself. So I'm thinking if you started with some of these columbines, they would reseed each year, and you would always have them coming back, whether the plant made it through the dry summer or not. And it sounds like it wouldn't hurt for you to maybe put out a soaker hose or some sort of drip irrigation maybe around that apple tree to give those plants a little bit of help during the summer, because when it gets dry, what happens is the apple tree, the big guy, is taking all of that moisture and nutrient up and using it. And these little guys that are shallow rooted, they're struggling. So I hope that's helpful. Now, I want to go back to Hosta for just a minute. As you know, I curate plants for Gilbert H. Wild & Son in Missouri. Been in business growing perennials since 1885, mail order. And they are running a special. They do this every year, which people love. They sell out, but I want to give you a clue before they do sell out. They do a program called Hosta by the Handful. I've seen gardens where gardeners have done a landscape, a ground cover of Hosta in full shade, and it's fantastic. So they send mixed hostas, Hosta by the handful. I don't remember what the price is. I think for 100 hostas, it's like, I don't know, $100. And they ship them to you. And you can get them planted in the garden. They'll all emerge, and you'll get this blanket of beautiful foliage like this. All right. I just want to thank you all for following me on our podcast. If you want to see the visual side of this and see us in studio and see these plants, you can do that with our vlog. Follow us on YouTube. Please subscribe to my channel and keep those comments coming. It's a lot of fun. And hey, we're open for tours at Moss Mountain Farm. If you hadn't been down to see us, May and June, fantastic months to see the roses and a lot of these perennials we're talking about. Okay? Until next time, signing off, Alan Smith. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and be sure to ring the bell for notifications.